we got convinced into coming here by Noah because he said there was going to be steaks here. And, no. So for those of you guys who don't know us, we host a podcast called the Meat Mafia Podcast, and Noah invited us to come ask some questions for his book launch, which to me was a very distinct honor. I know a lot of people in the room really look up to Noah and admire the work that he's done. And I think for this being his second book launch, I was at his first one. To see this many people come out and support is so awesome. So I just want to give a quick round of applause to Noah and just celebrate him for all his
And so we met Noah, I think it was 2 years ago?
Yeah.
At the sauna at Kuya. Has anyone else met?
Oh my
did anyone else
gosh,
meet Noah at the sauna by any chance? Was there any saunas with Noah? And when we met him, we connected over the fact that the three of us were college athletes. So we were like, athletic, great lawyers, crushing at his job. And then we go on to figure out he's so good at so many different things, whether it's like the community he's helped build at Squatch, all the businesses, all the different people that he's helped supported. And then we come to find out that he's an incredible author. Harry and I have been in Austin for 2 years. He's literally written 2 books, so a book a year since we've been in town. So we're so pumped to just have this incredible, intentional community here for his book launch. But no, I think to kick it off, very simply, this book, A History of a Hero, what is a hero? What is your best definition of a hero, just to kind of get things rolling?
Yeah, to get things rolling, I'm gonna read a little bit from the book that kind of answers that question. It's 3 pages. Before we really get into those meat and potatoes, I would be remiss if I did not first say thank you from the bottom of my heart to each and every one of you that showed up today. If you would have told me 3 years ago that I would be talking to a group of people, having written the second book, I would have said no way. But I've been really thinking a lot lately about how trying to soak in the fact that Austin and this community in general has a remarkable way of making the things that you said no way about become your todays. And that's what's so special about Squatch. That's what's so special about you guys and what you're doing, Danny, what you're doing, Yash, we're doing, everybody, Bray, Jason, everybody in this community is just the way that we support each other. And it's like, we can't see what we can't see, but there are so many things in my life these last 2 years where I would have said no way not that long ago, and now they're just ordinary. And so I'm trying to be intentional about not rushing past this and really sort of soaking it in and expressing my gratitude, because I wouldn't be here without each and every one of you's fingerprints on me in some way, shape, or form. So I truly thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. So to answer their question, I'm just going to read a few pages of the book. If you have a book, these are going to be pages 20. Sorry. No, all right. So it's if and when you get the book, because it's not mandatory you buy the book. This is pages 16. Sorry, we're gonna 19 through 22. But all right. So first off, little group participation. Zach, what is a hero? This is a trick question.
My own personal opinion of a hero is someone who overcomes darkness or a challenge and comes out on the other side victorious.
That's a great definition. So, American Heritage Dictionary defines a hero, dictionary definition, in 4 ways. The first definition they offer is a person noted for feats of courage or nobility of purpose, especially one who risked or sacrificed one's life. And then they give examples, soldiers or nurses. The second definition, a person noted for special achievement in a particular field. Third definition, the principal character in a novel, poem, or dramatic presentation. And then the fourth one they offer is, in mythology or legend, an individual, often a man of divine ancestry, who is endowed with great courage and strength, celebrated for bold exploits, and favored by the gods. Now, in the book, I talk a little bit about each of those definitions isn't quite right for a number of different reasons. There's this guy named Andrew Bernstein who wrote a book about why heroism matters, and he sort of talks about some of this, and so I'm not going to break it down. But he ultimately comes to the conclusion, and this is how he defines what a hero is. A hero is a morally upright individual who, with ability and dauntlessness exceeding that of the everyman, confronts the obstacles and/or dangers arising in pursuit of significant life-advancing goals, and who triumphs in at least a moral sense. So this is where I'm going to actually read the book. So I think his definition is good. I don't think it's perfect. We'll drop in here. So this definition seems as good as any that we might come up with for what a hero is. But a hero is also more than this. Heroes help us define our limits and outline our aspirations. They demonstrate the ideals of a given culture in action. A hero might never know who or how many they uplift psychologically or morally. The sight of an achievement was the greatest gift a human being can offer to another. Indeed, it's not a stretch to say that each of us is largely defined by our ideals. Heroes define our ideals. Things like courage, kindness, strength, and wisdom are determined by the heroes we choose. This means that the heroes we aspire to largely define us and are predictive symbols for all of the qualities we would like to possess, or in the case of villains, avoid. Somebody who picks Martin Luther King, Gandhi, or Abraham Lincoln as a hero will have a very different idea of success than someone who picks, for instance, Achilles or Alexander the Great or Hitler. This is how who we define as our hero matters. This is why who we define as a hero matters. Because whom we hold out as heroes, especially in education, largely determines not only our orientation, but also points our youth toward what they ought to pursue. I'm going to pause here. There's this idea that what we admire as a culture, we will produce more of. That is why it matters who we admire and hold out as heroes. Not long ago, bracelets with the letters WWJD were worn by many, standing for what would Jesus do. They aimed to remind the wearer to consider how Jesus might act if he were in their shoes. In many ways, this book is an attempt to better equip both of us to answer the question, what would a hero do whenever we find ourselves at a crossroads in our lives? How might we mimic their patterns of being and approaches to adventure in ways that would make us into someone we admire? Of course, these questions assume that we can identify who true heroes are at all. A couple of years ago, the administrators of the Barron Prize for Young Heroes polled American teenagers and found only half could name a personal hero. Superman and Spider-Man were named twice as often as Gandhi, Martin Luther King, or Lincoln. The ancient Greek and biblical heroes were essentially lost entirely. More than half of the students polled gave the name of an athlete, a movie star, or a musician. 1 in 10 named winners of American Idol as heroes. If that same study was replicated today, I suspect many would name social media stars on platforms like YouTube and TikTok. Suffice it to say, as time takes us further and further away from the age of heroes, where greatness preceded and was a qualification for fame, it becomes easier to confuse celebrity with excellence, as more and more of the young would rather be famous than great. It is the job then of the modern educator and storyteller to recommit to the purpose of returning our attention to the excellence much labored for by the race of man. It is the role of the teacher to lift stories of great heroes to the top of mind, lest we allow what is true to be supplanted by what is new. As Nietzsche declared on behalf of philosophers and poets throughout time, it falls to we whose task is wakefulness to ensure all worthy things of the past are not forgotten. Each age requires a few ambassadors to preserve things worthy from past ages. This is especially the case in our nihilistic age, where we've watched many of our heroes betray us and shatter our belief in the ideals. We watch Washington and Jefferson hold slaves, or Martin Luther King accused of philandering, and suddenly our heroes become villains. But like the old historians, we must do the hard work of separating what makes one noteworthy from their shortcomings. None of us are perfect, all of us stumble, and one stumble does not make us unworthy, it makes us human. Darkness wins when we let a single falter inform our eternal character and decide that striving towards excellence is worthless. Yes, our heroes stumbled, wavered, and made fools of themselves, just as we do, but they nonetheless rose up and accomplished beautiful deeds. And if they can do it, perhaps we might do so too. What was possible for them is possible for us. One of the reasons we need heroes so badly is they help lift our eyes a little higher. From the crooked timber of humanity, Immanuel Kant once said, no straight thing was ever made. Perhaps that is true, but even crooked timber may be made into something beautiful, which is what heroes remind us with their actions, that we too, for all our flaws, may yet be beautiful if our choices are. It is my hope that you will leave this book with a vision of what a beautiful life looks like and the courage to start living it. This way to the stars. So, thank you. So I like that's a long answer to your question, but it's yeah.
Well done.
No, but like
It's almost like
defining
you wrote it out before.
yeah, defining what a hero is very difficult. And honestly, I'm not going to claim to have a perfect definition. I merely want to spark the conversation because it is the ultimate conversation we need to be having. Who are the heroes that we want to hold out? Who do we want to produce more of in the future? That's what we have to be careful about, and that's why we need to talk about it. And that's what this discussion is about. And if you have an idea of what the hero is, especially if you read this book and you disagree with me, that ultimately, this book is I could not remove myself from my perspective. And so I'm writing from a very unique perspective with a very unique upbringing. There are elements of the world I cannot see, have not seen, we're not raised in. So I need to rely on you guys with your individual experiences to point out where I am blind. This is about getting the conversation started so we can start talking about what is true, what is good, what is beautiful, and what do we want to move the world toward? What direction do we want to go? Who do we want to inhabit it? How do we become the heroes? And like, what do we want to see? So ultimately, that's kind of underlying the aim of this book was, I know we've talked before about this idea of like criticized by creating. And so this book is my own effort to like, how do I, instead of just worrying about what waits in the future, how do I help push it in a direction that I believe elevates the future?
I love it. So so this is your second book. How does your first book kind of lead into this one, kind of building a base of knowledge? Because it's all about introduction to philosophy, which plays perfectly into heroes, but I'm curious to get kind of your opinion on your thinking of just constructing it that way, where you do philosophy, then this whole narrative around heroes.
So without trying to get too far in the weeds here, but I love the classics. And so if we're talking classics, we're talking in the context of the hero, this is Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. If we're talking philosophers, we're talking Plato's Republic. And so just those two alone. Plato's Republic is more philosophy. Obviously in the Iliad by Homer is more of the hero. So this is going to illustrate sort of the connection between the two. Now honestly, history would say I should probably reverse them. Homer comes before Plato. And the idea is that the myth writers, the early poets, actually did the hard work of taking intuitions that they felt about the universe and writing stories about what is causing these things. And so Homer had to come before Plato because he had to be like, what is the cause for this random sea storm? There must be some Poseidon. There must be some sort of sea being out there sort of moving these things. And then they had to actually put a theory out there before somebody like Plato could be like, listen, let's take, and Aristotle, and they can, be like, examine them and the actual knowledge of causes of things. So if you read Plato's Republic, he talks a lot about, so we're on the philosophy side, he actually didn't really like Homer that much because he thought Homer, in the Iliad, this goes to the idea of like what you admire, you produce more of. He thought that Achilles, the Iliad starts, sing, O muse, of the rage of Achilles. And so it's this whole entire poem about the tantrum of a very strong guy who refuses to go to war, and when he does, he kills an enormous amount of people, and then he dies at the end. Like that is there's a lot more things obviously, but fundamentally, it's like Plato asks this question of, is this really the type of person that we want to be training our youth to be like? And so I saw it as fundamental to start with philosophy so that when we encounter the myths, we're able to encounter them with this idea of like, what is true? Aristotle is known for the saying of like, it's basically the mark of a quality mind is the ability to entertain a thought without accepting it. So philosophy gives us the tools to vet ideas and their truth and whether hold them up to the light of goodness and truth and beauty and say, is this something that withstands that test? Or which pieces of it withstand that test, and which of it are maybe things that, like aspects that don't necessarily line up. I mean, we see this in the biblical heroes too. Like it's the story of David. There are great qualities of David in the Bible, and there are poor ones. And so it's our ability to discern those two things, which is why I thought starting with philosophy first would allow us to encounter the ideas in mythology in a way that we could really filter for what the best in those stories was.
One of the things that I loved in the passage that you read because when I was thinking about the definition of a hero, I was almost thinking of these people like as close to perfection as possible. But I love that you mentioned just some of the stumblings and the flaws that a lot of these heroes had. I think you mentioned Jefferson. You'd mentioned I don't think you mentioned David, but you mentioned someone else. But
Washington.
Washington. But it makes them relatable in a sense too, where the goal is not perfection. It seems like the goal is to be the best version of yourself that you could possibly be. So I'm just curious, do you think the fact that these heroes had their own tribulations, their own stumblings along the way, is that actually a good thing? Like, does a hero actually have stumblings as a part of their process too?
Now, there are a few different points there. One, it's never a binary question of are you a hero or not. It's a question of to what extent are you a hero, just as it's a question of to what extent are you a villain. So some of you might be familiar with the two wolves proverb, Native American proverb, but we all have two wolves in us. And what wins is the one that you feed. So that's what myths do generally is Joseph Campbell would call them mirrors. Myths are mirrors. And so what they do is they're reflective. They tell us about the mysteries of the energies that pour into us. So each character in a myth, both the villains and the hero, are representative of energies and things inside us. And so all of us have a villain inside us. At the end of the book, I have a section on if you think about Jesus, or if like Eastern religions, you can think about it as Buddha, as being representative of sort of meta heroes, pulling all of the best virtues of all of the heroes up into a single figure. Like you can think about Jesus that way. Just as you could think about the biblical devil as pulling down all of the worst vices of the villains into a single figure. And so those energies live inside us, all of us. It's not a question of whether sort of those darker energies are in us. It's a question of how much we choose to feed them and how we feed them. So this is the idea of like, one of the things we learn over and over again is like, whenever the devil is represented in fiction literature, he's a spirit of that denies, so he doesn't want things to be created. He's a spirit of resentment. He's a spirit of pride. And it's like, those are in us. Those are things. And so it's a matter of which direction you want to move, the direction of this darker thing or this lighter thing. And as human beings, all of us are fighting that civil war every single day. And so when we're talking about heroes that lived in real life, whether it's Washington or Jefferson, or anybody you want to name, Lincoln, I don't know why I'm naming all presidents, but but that same war is happening. And so that's why we have to have this discernment of like, we look at a human being and understanding that it's this constant battle that's happening. And it's like, how do we tilt ourselves towards the heroic? How do we tilt ourselves toward good? And it's a decision we have to make every single day. It's not a war that's ever won with finality. It's something we have to fight every second, every decision of every day. And that takes a commitment to truth. And it takes humility because we can't see what we can't see. So we have to rely on others to be honest with us about our own flaws. And then we have to have the courage and the strength to sort of own up to those things, understanding that our tendency is to want to deny the darkness, that there's any darkness, that there's any way we are embodying the darkness. But the truth is we do it every single day. It's not a question of whether, it's to what extent. And so it's starting with that assumption of I have played the villain and will play the villain today in people's lives. How should that change my behavior? How does that change how I'm aware of how I'm interacting with people? And so we all want to be heroic. We all like to think of ourselves in that light way. But we have to be honest and say that there's these darker aspects that when we least expect it or when we're tired, they show up too. They're as much part of us as anything else. And it's not a matter of, James Clear has the idea of every action is a vote for your future self. And so it's about who are you moving toward? Who are you voting for in the future? So the best we can ask of anybody is to sort of move toward that place of elevation versus the one of sort of a downward spiral.
I'm going to throw that question back in your face. So how have you seen yourself evolve through writing this book about heroes? Have you seen yourself start to gravitate towards different stories or different characteristics as you wrote this book?
How many people in here want to write a book? Okay. I bet there's some people that didn't raise their hands that want to, but that's all right. Everybody should write a book, even if nobody buys it, because it is, in my opinion, hands down, the best tool and vehicle outside perhaps entrepreneurship for self-development and growth. You will learn more about yourself in the process of writing a book, assuming you're writing something that you are authentically in love with and passionate about. it is an excavation project unlike any in this world that I know of. So if you want to accelerate personal growth, write a book. Write a book. The forced thinking that it makes you do about yourself, and where your thoughts and ideas and things you stand for, where there are flaws and gaps in your logic, you have no choice but to address those when you write a book. Because if you don't, it's going to be a pretty crappy book. It's not going to make sense. So if you have any gaps in how you're thinking about things, how you see the world, you're going to be forced to stare those in the face when you write a book. So how I've changed, honestly, is ironically enough, in writing the book about heroes, I've become more aware of where I'm not that. So it's highlighted more the gap between me and the ideal. And it's caused me to be honest about the largeness of that gap. Brett, I know you're familiar with this story. I'm obsessed with the idea of beauty. I'm like capital B beauty in like the Platonic way, which is the form of beauty. And then anytime we see something beautiful on earth, it is an embodiment, it is a shadow, it is a sample of this beauty that exists in this higher realm. There's this idea of beauty will save the world, is what Dostoevsky says. And it's this idea that, well, what does that mean, beauty will save the world? Because when you encounter something truly beautiful, it moves you. Everything beautiful has the mark of eternity, is what French philosopher Simone Weil says. So what does that mean? If you think about this in the context of Rainier Maria Rilke is one of my favorite poets. He's the guy that wrote Letter to a Young Poet. He's got a poem called The Archaic Torso of Apollo. In The Archaic Torso of Apollo, he takes the perspective of a person looking at this statue. It's a broken statue. It's curved. It's got cracks. But he's looking it up and down. And the whole poem is about, if beauty doesn't exist, this broken statue could not speak to him the way it does. And so he's looking this thing up and down, and he gets to the end, and it's as if the statue, it's as if he's no longer looking at the statue is now looking at him. The poem ends with, you must change your life. In the face of beautiful things, what's highlighted is where you don't measure up to that beauty. This is the same reason that when you know, with Caesar and then the statue of Alexander, he sees the statue of Alexander, he starts to weep. Yeah. Why? Because that highlights the gap of he's not that. He's got all of this direction to go. But this is where, like, Nietzsche talks about sort of the ability to withstand the wounding that comes when you're in the presence of truth. That is going to determine how remarkable you are as a person. So the same thing happens with beauty. It's like, to the extent you can sit with beautiful things and look at them and feel the burn and feel sort of the deficiency, the honest deficiency that comes when it shows you how far you have to go. Our ability to do that day in and day out is the thing that pushes us forward ultimately. And like, that's what's going to elevate us as people, as an individual, is how much beauty can we look at? Yeah. But our answer today, frankly, is we want to throw out the idea of beauty, that there isn't any idea of objective beauty. Yeah. And so that things come crumbling down when you do that, because there is no up, there is no down, there is no good, there is no bad. And so we have no direction to move.
That's really well said. When you were speaking to, it made me realize how contrarian it actually is to write a book in modern society. It's like we live for the 30-second clip that you can just post that hopefully gets you like thousands of followers, gets that instant dopamine hit. Like, writing something like this is the complete opposite of that. For you, this is like 300 pages of love. There's also like a certain level of pain associated with that too. I mean, you've written 2 books in 2 years. I'm just curious. It looks like there's a lot of aspiring writers that want to write their own books someday. Yeah. What are like just some practical tips towards becoming a better writer, or what is your flow like? Like, what are just some nuggets that people can take away from you in your writing process?
Yeah, I guess I'll start first with, I'll go back to Rainier Maria Rilke. So, yes, to a certain extent I write because I love it, but ultimately I write because I have to. If I didn't, there are a lot of years in my life where I didn't write, and it puts me in a bad spot mentally. I fundamentally feel like this is a thing I was put on this earth to do. One of my favorite stories and heroes to talk about is King Arthur and the Knights and the Holy Grail, and sort of this idea of the Grail question. We might talk more about this later. The Grail question is, how can I be of highest service to my fellow human being in the world? And the idea is, how can you use your gifts to best serve the world? So I've really thought about that a lot over the last couple of years. And I can't escape this compulsive need to write. So if you ask me why I choose writing in a way that's countercultural, it doesn't feel that way to me. I write because I have to. I write because I must. Because if I didn't, I'd be in a pretty poor state mentally and wouldn't be a joy to be around at all. In terms of practical tips, there's this idea. There's the verse in the Bible is seek first the kingdom of heaven, and to me, it's like once you find that thing you feel like you've been put on this earth to do, then it becomes this idea of how you act in the world actually says more about what you believe than what you say, right? And so you worship things with your actions, not necessarily your words. So it's like what's getting the best and highest and first fruits of your life, that's ultimately what you worship. And so for me, it's like it's the first thing I do every single morning is I set aside time to write. The other practical tip I'll say for people that you have to, depending on what you want to write, you have to redefine what it means to write. So for me, if I say I'm going to spend the first 2 hours of my day writing, that could be reading for the book. It's not like 2 hours staring at the screen, typing. No, that includes everything from the research to the writing piece. So it's like, it's the bookmaking. So when I say the first thing I do every morning is write, first thing I do every morning is bookmake. Yeah. All the things that are required for bookmaking. Because fundamentally for me, that is my way of, it's because of the things I'm talking about and thinking about, it just so happens for me to be the way that I spend time with God. And like truly think about and sort of search for truth and seek. That's how I seek first the kingdom. And so practically what I would say is like, if you're serious about wanting to write, you have to be honest with yourself about whether you're giving it energy. Because the reality is we all have a finite amount of energy. We like to think we have an inexhaustible amount. But it's like credits we get each single day. And the things that we want to grow and foster has to get our energy. Otherwise, it's not going to. If we come to the end of our day and all we have left is scraps, and we think suddenly we're going to find new energy to work on this thing, you're fooling yourself. So it could be your spouse. It could be this project you're working on. It could be, a program. I don't care what it is. Whatever you say has the highest priority in your life, is it actually? Does your life suggest it's the highest priority in your life? So that's the first thing I would say is it's everything in a season. So it's like if you really want to write a book, then you need to show the book that you want to write it. You need to show up and actually write the thing. The other thing I would say, I had the good fortune of in law school becoming very good friends with a few of the professors, and so I ended up co-teaching a writing class. And so just in terms of skills, skill set, it's a lot of, law school in general is a lot of, you have to learn how to write clearly, quickly. And so I would say also if you want to write, take a course on how to write clearly, because that's going to save you so much time in the long run. If you can have a good outline, the book writes itself. And so spend time on the outline, not too much, but enough to give you a sense of direction. Everybody's got a unique process. My process is I have to write the whole first draft of my book to know what my book's about. And then I have to go back and edit it based on the insights I got from just the first draft. How I do it, my rule, is curiosity leads the way. I view it as my job just to show up every morning and then let curiosity do its thing. If it wants to take me down a rabbit hole, I follow it down that rabbit hole. And eventually I end up pruning a lot of that out in the editing process. But I've found, and this is an idea from, I can't even remember the name of the movie, but the writer's block in general. I haven't read Rick Rubin's book yet, but you'll be able to tell me if it's in there. I'm positive it's in there in some way, shape, or form. So writer's block to me is just inserting yourself into the process. It's when you're letting your ego interrupt the flow from source. And so if you're having a problem with writer's block, it's because you want to take the thing a direction it doesn't want to go. Your only job is to show up and listen. So when I say let curiosity lead the way, that's what I mean. show up and listen. If it's something that I think is like a tangent or unrelated, it doesn't matter. I have to let myself go there. Like you guys know, whether it's YouTube or Wikipedia, you find yourself in a place and you're like, how in the world did I get here? But you got to go there. You got to go to all those places, and then you climb back up, and maybe it was only one nugget that you found. Maybe it unraveled this whole thing, this whole world. You don't know, so you just got to show up, and you have to be devoted to it. I don't know if that answers. I'm sure people have specific questions, but that's like my process in general.
You're really good at anticipating my questions. What was the low point for you during this book writing process, and what was the high point for you in the book writing process? Whether it was a story that you needed to pull out, or just like a character that you found particularly easy to write about?
Oh my gosh, man, the highs and lows were. Shanoa can attest to this. Right before this, I was like in a bad spot. I was like in a dark spot. I was like
today?
Yeah, today. No, because what's weird for me is like after the book is out, and this is just a personal reflection of myself. I have a defense mechanism that makes it much easier to. I'm 100,000 words in my third book, and so it's much easier for me to just, instead of showing up to something like this and talking about my book, like who am I to think that this thing is so valuable that people would show up and actually want to hear about this thing? Like all you got to do is look at the footnotes, and it's full of people smarter than I am, who've said it better than I have, who've been around much longer, and so it's like I'm just trying to show my work of like working through their material and my synthesis of their stuff. And so it's really hard for me to sit here and talk about it as if I hold the keys to the universe. I would much rather just be working on my third book and like blow right past this. That's much easier for me. And so this is why if any of you have talked to me, even after I wrote my first book, and be like, oh yeah, I can't wait to buy your first book. And then my default response is like, you don't need to buy the book. Or don't buy the book. And it's like, I don't know why I do that. But that's what I do. And so like after writing the book is actually one of the hardest parts for me, is because then it's this weird space of I'm no longer working on this thing I care so deeply about. While I'm in it, it's actually, I know all I have to do is show up and pour myself into it. But then once it's done, it's like, oof, now what? So it's honestly the lowest part comes after I write it. I will say the hardest part, one of the reasons I love writing so much is because I can't think of anything harder. So in the same way you might think of something very difficult physically to do to like strengthen yourself. If I think about what the equivalent is intellectually, I'm not sure there's something harder. There's this idea of like time under. I wish Dave was here because Dave talks about this. In the same way, time under tension grows your muscles. Time under attention grows your intellectual muscles, right? And so there's no better way to put your mind under attention and focus in a way that actually sort of forces your brain to grow than writing a book. And so to me, writing a book is the equivalent of working out every single day. Like that, this is what I do for my brain because it sharpens my thinking, my ability to like articulate what I'm trying to say. Yeah, and so that's like, I can't even remember the question, but.
The highs and lows of the process.
Okay. Why I brought that up. So there's a section in the book talks about the origins of consciousness. And it was hands down, no exception to this rule. Nothing I did in law school, not the LSAT, not the bar exam. Intellectually, the hardest thing I've ever written in my life. And why that is because if any of you have tried to read and understand Carl Jung and like the psychoanalyst, it is tough. It is a different language. But fundamentally, this idea, why I bring it up is he had this idea that myths were the soul's way of educating itself. And I think that's so important. If we think about what the early mythologists and poets were doing is they had these intuitions, it came out in the form of myth, And there was this feedback loop. They could look at the myth, and that myth then went back into them. And sort of there's this evolving, this spiral upwards that happens with that feedback loop. And so writing through that piece of it was like, I remember there were days where my brain physically hurt, and I was like, I can't write this section. I can't do it. Highs? I don't know, dude. Honestly, I think the highs are one of those things where, since I moved to Austin, I've never had so many happy tears. And what I mean by that is like random days where maybe I'll be writing, and it'll be just a random thing I'm writing about, and tears will just well up. And they're not sad tears. They're happy. And to me, it's just like this sort of nudge, this wink, this tug that like, you're where you're supposed to be doing what you're supposed to be doing. And so those are the highs. It's not like this great feeling of elation. It's this feeling of like you're getting a hug from God, effectively is what it feels like. And there's this warmth that rises from your belly, and then it reaches up and comes out your eyeballs. And it's like, this is it. This is what life, this is living. Those are the highs. I think that's why I love just like, as soon as I do it, I was like, I just want to get back to writing, because like, I want to feel that. But
It's a great place to be. So we probably have time for like one more question before we open it up
Yeah.
to audience Q&A. So when I was reading the book, probably the most impactful moment for me was the moment that you had in your college class. What was the course called? It was like Lincoln and...
Lincoln in the Constitution.
Of course
isn't-
you would take a class like that.
Yeah,
Lincoln
yeah.
in the Constitution. And so your professor, it sounds like he asked you a question that really stumped you, even though you gave a good answer. And his response was, well, no, I guess you haven't had your Lincoln moment yet. So I think you could just, if you could tell that
Yeah.
story, and then what actually is a Lincoln moment.
Yeah, so Michael Stokes Paulson was a name of one of my law school professors. He's written a bunch of books of his own. He's kind of considered one of the top constitutional scholars in the country, and I was just lucky enough to take a couple of classes with him. And so we're in Lincoln in the Constitution, and we're at the stage where we're talking about the Emancipation Proclamation. And so without getting too into the weeds, Lincoln wasn't that popular when he lived. Now he gets appropriated by every single president that we have who claims to be like Lincoln. Everybody wants to claim they're like Lincoln. But the reality is in his day, he wasn't that well liked. So the Emancipation Proclamation comes well into the Civil War. So there are bodies that are just, there's an enormous amount of bloodshed. Before he signs it, he actually goes to his cottage by himself, and he's watching them cart bodies from Gettysburg. And like, so he is forced, as the president, he's responsible for that because he will not settle for peace. He's responsible for this stack of bodies that's building. So that's a heavy weight, but he's fighting for something fundamentally he believes in. And so his idea is like, we either have no slavery or we don't have a country. And so the war persists. The bodies keep stacking up. And finally, he decides to sign the Emancipation Proclamation, not knowing what would come after that. Like, what would the South do? Like, what would the body count continue to be if he decided to continue this war when he could just make peace and they could go their separate ways? South wants to secede, let them secede. And so, as we often did in Lincoln in the Constitution, we sort of like talking through this whole hypothetical, and Professor Paulson looks at me and he asks me, what would you do if you were in Lincoln's shoes, watching these mounting bodies stack up, and you had the option to stop it? All you had to do was let the South go. What would you do? Well, we have the benefit of hindsight, but I looked at him and I said, after I sort of paused a little bit, and I go, I hope I would have the courage to do what Lincoln did. Sort of stand up for what you know is right, regardless of the cost. And then be willing to suffer the slings and arrows of the public that wants to hold you to account for all of the bodies on your behalf that are stacked because you're deciding for standing for that truth. That's hard. It's a hard thing to do. Mm-hmm. But I told him, I said, I hope I would have the strength and courage and insight and discernment to do what Lincoln did. And he looks back at me and he says, Mr. Heisman, you may yet have your Lincoln moment. And that, I didn't let anybody see it at the time, but that like hit me like a ton of bricks. And I remember like silently putting my head down and like doing like one of the, like crying a little bit, not letting anybody hear. So I'm gonna read a quote in here. So this also comes up in when I talk about David. This is a quote that's attributed to Winston Churchill, but he didn't actually say it, as that often happens a lot on the internet, but it's great. So the quote is this: "To every man there comes in his lifetime that special moment when he is figuratively tapped on the shoulder and offered a chance to do something special, unique to him and fitted to his talents. What a tragedy if that moment finds him unprepared or unqualified for that which would be his finest hour." So what a Lincoln moment is it's that testing point that we all find in our lives, we all come to in our lives, where we will be called to stand for what we say we believe in or take the easy route and give in. Will we stand up for an unpopular truth and suffer the consequences? That's what a Lincoln moment is this idea of like standing in the rootedness of the transcendent truth, beauty, and goodness, insofar as God gives us the ability to see that, and standing in that with conviction and being willing to suffer what comes, regardless of the consequence, regardless of if we lose our job or a loved one, whatever it is. Like that's what the heroes throughout time and time again, if you read the book, you'll see is their willingness, their unwavering willingness to be the person that suffers the consequences of standing for something that other people don't see or won't admit. So that's what a Lincoln moment is for me.
Before we hopped up here, I asked Noah, give me one word or one sentence to like describe what everyone's gonna feel leaving here. And he said, I'm fired up. So I think it's a good place to leave it. I feel pretty fired up after that. I think we have time for 2 questions. If people wanna hop up or throw your hand up and ask Noah some questions.
It's okay if you
Great.
don't. Yeah, you got a question?
I got one.
Yeah,
Nobody else.
Shoot.
have at it.
What were you afraid of before you started writing this that you're no longer afraid of now?
Honestly, I don't know if this is going to answer your question, but I feel more secure in who I am as a human being than I've ever felt in my life, in the sense that I feel very confident in who I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to be doing. And I think previously in my life I would have been scared about how that would be accepted and received by the people whose opinions I care about. And now it's like, one thing Austin has been great for me in is this idea that I don't have to be anything special for the friends and the people that truly love me to be around. There's nothing specific I have to do. And I think through writing this book, it sort of solidified it continued to work in me that started with the first book, which is this sort of coming into this purest expression of myself and trying to do that in a way that is just totally committed to. There's this idea, Emerson, sorry, I'm kind of going off script a little bit. Emerson has this essay called Self-Reliance. It's one of my favorite essays. And he talks about how what's in you is new in nature. And so there's this idea that there's a unique ray of sun that falls on us and only us in all of time. And if it does not shine through us, the world will never see it. And my conviction in that statement alone, that it is my job to steward that piece of light that falls on me into the world, that I feel wholly committed to. And I don't need, like, obviously I'm a human being, but it's that sort of rootedness and purpose. I'm not scared. Like, I'm probably not going to sell that many of these books. I don't care. Like, I do, but I don't. And it's sort of that like commitment to, this is the work I'm supposed to be doing. And now it's just like, eternity is my timeline. I'm not answering to anybody but above. So I don't have anything that I have to do for anybody on this earth other than show them as much as possible and be a reflection of the eternal. Kevin. What's up, dude?
this is a specific question, so you don't have to go too deep on it, but I just wanted to hear your thoughts.
Wow.
You know, Nietzsche's critique of Christianity in the sense that Christ is a archetypal hero that is,
Peasant morality.
yes, he's for the downcast, etc.
Yeah.
And even Jung had realized that there was an issue like that could come up in Western society where like we're putting so much emphasis on that, we're losing out on the more classic like strength hero.
Yeah.
Hercules, the more like. Do you think that's a legitimate criticism? Because as a Christian, I hear that and I'm like, that's kind of true in a way. You know?
Yeah.
It's like, so is there an ideal hero that one archetype can fit everything? Because obviously, I would want to pick one.
The medieval knights.
What's that?
The medieval knights. Read an essay called The Necessity of Chivalry by C.S. Lewis. So he talks about the need for sort of he talks about Lancelot being this intersection between meekness and boldness. So if you read about King Arthur and his knights, they are this synthesis of sort of this honor, glory, fighting of the ancient Greek hero, like Achilles and Hercules, Theseus, Perseus. They're a fusion of that with the Christian morality of the saints. And so they are the ones that they will, I mean, this is St. George too. So I would say St. George and King Arthur and the knights are that synthesis of that reclaiming of, and this is part of like the medieval times and sort of up to the Renaissance anyway, as there's this fusion of Christianity with classical society. And so it's part of the reason I end with St. George and King Arthur and his knights. There's also, another book called Discarded Image by C.S. Lewis you should read. And he talks about our deviation from the medieval model. But anyway, to answer your question, I think there is some validity to the overemphasis on meekness. But I'm not sure that's a deficiency in the Bible. I think it's a deficiency on the church. You got one?
If one was searching for their hero's journey and they wanted a little bit of a direction, what would you tell them? Would it be a couple steps or would there be a statement you would tell them?
Yeah. So before I actually talk about any of the specific heroes, I give an overview of the hero's journey in general. The first step, archetypally, is the call to adventure. And so the call to adventure. And so what I would ask you candidly to think about is, where have you been ignoring those sort of strange tugs? Those things that would be like, pour into this, lean into this a little bit more. Maybe there's this creative side that you set on the sidewalk of little you, where it was like, I need to go after more productive pursuits in my life. And so I'm going to let this piece of me die. I'm going to neglect it a little bit. Go back to where you left them and pick it back up. So for me, that was writing. So I would say, to start your hero's journey, think long and hard about if there's anything, if you catch in conversations with your wife, right? What are the things when you're saying like, I really should fill in the blank? You're like, ask her, like, what are the things you hear me say constantly? What do I repeat as things I want to do one day? Or things I say like, oh, I really should do X. What would it look like to start feeding those things? It may not be the thing, but that's what the call is. That's what the representation of answering the call is. So if this is any motivation for you, the story of Jonah is the perfect example of refusing the call. He receives the call to go to Nineveh and tell them to turn from their wicked ways. He refuses it. What happens? He runs from them, and then all of a sudden a storm comes and assails the ship. You refuse the call, the seas get stormy. Well, that's representative of that's an external representation of what happens internally. This is how the Bible talks about the fundamental nature of being, of like it expresses sort of in poetic form things that happen internally. And so we experience that when we refuse the call, the things that we want to do, we feel like we should be doing, we don't do those things. Anxiety, that's the stormy sea inside us. What happens when they finally throw them off the boat? The seas go calm. What happens when we answer the call? The seas go calm. So just think about the in your life, listen. It's the same antidote to writer's block. Listen. That would be my advice. Chels.
You talk about like the two wolves, right? And something
Yeah.
I've been sitting with lately is how do you turn the darkness into something beautiful? Like how do you tap into that and actually feed that, and then it turns into something great? Like Taylor Swift, Heartbreak into an album, right? It's beautiful. Do you have a specific example of how you tapped in and fed that dark wolf, and how it like relates to this book and creation of it? Did you at all? I guess is maybe the better question.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. This is a long conversation, but Jung has this idea of no tree can reach to heaven unless its roots reach to hell. What the heck does that mean? Well, something when I like started training really hard again, what I realized is, and I'm going to speak to men specifically because that's my personal experience. I think in our current society, there's a lot of domestication of men, and so we are told that we can't have these aspects of us, whether it's sort of like rage or anger or strength. And so I don't want to say neutered, but in a sense, we are told to put that in a box and we bury it, right? Well, there was a time when I started to train really hard again, and CJ knows this. I lost my temper, which I never do, hadn't done in a very long time, on a good friend of ours, Alex Weber. And I was like, where in the world did that come from? But there's a direct association of your ability to harness those energies and how high you can reach. And so that's where it's like, if you neglect them, you can put your dark energy in a box, but you're also putting potential in a box if you do that. And so it's all a matter of degree, and it's all a matter of, so Plato has this idea of the allegory of a chariot, and there is a dark horse and a light horse that are leading this chariot. And so fundamentally, like you can get energy from that dark horse as long as they're not calling the shots. As long as they're not ultimately dictating your direction, there's energy and power there where if you can funnel it toward good, but ultimately let sort of the lighter part of your nature make the final decision. That's the best example I can give you of like sitting with some of the darker aspects. And I think fundamentally it's more of a communication thing. And that's sort of how you use those. It's like an acknowledgement of them in your life and their presence in your life. And it's about not denying them. But I don't have like a great concrete example other than that. Because it's weird. I don't think about it like feeding the dark wolf. I think about it as like just not putting it in a cage. But I don't know if I think about it right. That's just how I think about it. B-Ray.
All right. This is a very important question. When are we getting our Knights of the Round Table here on the Squash campus? And my second question is, what would be the modern version of knighting people? We're building so many heroes in this room already. How can we acknowledge them in the form of knighting people? What would be the modern version of that?
I mean, we're going to have to create it because there isn't one. I would put that to the group. Scott, what do you think? Yeah. I was going to say baptized, but...
I've always been a fan of the broadsword, man. And just like, on the shoulder. I think that's great.
Yeah, I mean, I think you keep knighting, man. I think you keep it. Yeah, I think you keep it. I have a sword at home. I'll bring it. Yeah. All right. Anybody else? No. All right. I have books in the back. I think we should have one for everybody. Thank you. Yeah. All good. You're good. Thank you again, guys, so much for coming. This truly does mean the world to me. I don't know what I did to deserve all of you here, and deserve you guys in my life. But thank you for showing up. Thank you for being part of this. And if there's any way I can help you on your journey, or Squatch can sort of help you, let us know. We fundamentally believe we're doing some pretty special things in this community, and you guys are all a part of it.